Hello, you are tuned in to the Toy Talks podcast. My name is Toy Washington. I hope that you've had a nice weekend. I hope you're having a great week. Let's keep this conversation going. My hashtag is Toya Talks and my Twitter handle is Toya, Toya_W. My Instagram is Toya, Toya_Washington, and the Toy Talks podcast Instagram is Toya_Talks. So now we've got that out of the way. I was having a conversation with somebody recently, and we started talking about alliances and allegiances in the office, especially amongst Black women, and it encouraged me to explore kind of how I interact with fellow Black women in the office, how I used to, and how I interact with Black women in the office now. One thing that I will say is, when you rewind back to when we were young Black girls growing up and not necessarily understanding race, but knowing or overhearing adult conversations about differences and maybe our parents' difficulties in the workplace. By the time I was old enough to start working and had my first office role, I would definitely say that I never really, I don't think I knew about microaggressions. In fact, I'd go as far as to say I probably didn't understand what microaggressions were. I obviously understood race and the differences and racism and other people's experiences, but I had no personal experience of kind of dealing with racism, and therefore I was not prepared to deal with it in an office space, or at least understand that racism isn't always overt. More times than not in the workplace, it's covert. And I definitely think that when it came to fellow Black women, I definitely saw the benefit of working with people who looked like you and feeling comfortable in a workspace, knowing that you're not the only Black person or Black woman in the office. I would definitely say that in understanding how I interacted with Black women, I had to look at my first example of a Black woman, and obviously it was my mum. And I definitely think that the difficult relationship I have with my mum definitely was a prelude to the difficult relationship I had with fellow Black women in the office. But that is a whole different conversation, and that's a bigger topic. I think once I identified that my first example of a Black woman was my mum, and some of those difficulties I had in my relationship with my mother definitely set an expectation, or a lack of an expectation, for dealing with Black women in the office. And I think as an African child, I know I'm not the only one who has experienced being raised in a household where comparisons to your mum's friends' children, or comparison to the children in church, that was just the way one was raised. And in talking to my other African or West Indian friends, I definitely see some similarities in our upbringing. And I think that it's really detrimental when you raise children to be competitive at such a young age, but don't teach them how to be competitive on a healthy level. And the competitiveness was usually between me and other Black children. Do you understand? So then when you go into the world of work, that competitiveness doesn't just switch off, it continues. So I would say, quite honestly, in my early 20s, I was really, really competitive. I didn't look at Black women as an alliance. I definitely looked at Black women as, especially people who were senior than me, I want to be where they are. There was never anything that occurred to me that said that there could be more than one Black woman in a senior position. And I think part of it is the construct of the workplace, where we don't see enough of ourselves in senior roles. We only see maybe one, at best two. So you can never imagine yourself being the third Black one or the second Black one. We're conditioned by the constructs in the way in which organizations either promote ethnic minorities, or in actually the way organizations are constructed, that you can go to an organization and you can see senior management and there'll be no Black person. And if you see one Black person, you almost feel like they have to leave for you to also then see yourself in that role. I definitely believe there's a responsibility on black women to open up our minds and allow ourselves to see each other as an alliance rather than the opposition, or rather than an obstacle to getting to a senior position, because we've only ever been conditioned to see one person at a time. It's really rare to see at least more than 50%, or even say 30% of black women in senior roles. I don't think I have never worked in an organisation where there's been a black woman in a senior role, and that is so sad to say. And when I say senior, I'm talking about senior director level. I'm not really seeing it. I've seen like black women in middle management roles, and that in itself is senior. But when I say senior, I mean really high ranking, influential roles in a company. It's not something that I see quite frequently. Now, as a full experienced adult, I would say mid to late 20s. When I started to develop my working life, and it's not just in the corporate world, but just in the world of work in general, I've worked in the private sector and the public sector. So when I deliver Toya Talks, it's not just for people in the corporate world, it's for people in the working world, because I am from the working world. I would definitely say that I have definitely seen black women as an alliance. Like, I love walking into organizations and seeing black women in different roles. We're talking about from accountancy to law. It's so warming to see that, because it means that we're walking through those doors and we're creating opportunities for ourselves, and we're breaking the mold to a certain degree. And I always said to myself, whenever I see a black woman in a lift in an organization, I will always say hello to her, because I definitely understand how it feels to go into an organisation and feel like the only one, or where you feel like, you know, you're like, for me, I've always definitely been supportive of other black women, and it's something that I pride myself on. You know, I will go into an organisation and I will go out of my way to speak to everybody and build relationships with everybody. But I have such a soft spot for black women, because I'm a black woman, and when we look at each other, we understand what each other's gone through without having to explain what we've been through. Does that make sense? I will never forget an organisation I was working in, and in this particular team, there were no black women. I was the only black woman. But to be fair, it was quite an ethnically diverse team, and there was a junior there, and she was a young black lady, and she wasn't necessarily in the team, but she was moving over from one team to another, and she was moving into the team I was in, and she'd been in the organisation for about 2.5 years. I'd literally been in the organisation by about 3 months by the time that she joined the team. And I always felt like there was this unhealthy competition that she had with me, because I definitely did not see her as competition. I just saw her as another member of staff, a black woman, and I'd go out of my way to train her, because, you know, organisations, they don't owe you anything. Some organisations, they're happy to keep you in that same position, and she was growing really frustrated with the role. And obviously, from her perspective, she's watched me come in and go into the role that she wanted and that she was previously promised. But rather than see me as build an alliance with me and allow me to train her if that's what she wanted, she saw me as a competitor, and it got really unhealthy to the point where I definitely felt a lot of negative energy from her. And you know, the devil always shows up. He always shows up. And I'll never forget, there was one day, and I had previously the week before given up my lunchtime for that whole week, and I was training her on certain things. And one thing with me is I love to teach. I love it, and it's a way for me to train myself and my knowledge as well. And she said to me, you know, I was supposed to have your job. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, you know, when I was first interviewed, they promised me this, promised me that. They never trained me for anything. And then before I knew it, there was a job advert, and then you've come in and now you've taken my job. And I said to her, but it wasn't your job, it was no one's job. And if that's how you felt, why didn't you discuss it with the manager when you saw that the job was advertised? Anyway, she saw me as an object of an obstacle, and things quickly turned sour, and I definitely felt a lot of resentment from her. So I began to just pull away from her, because also what I never wanted to do is antagonize her or make her feel like I was her enemy. But I was her enemy the moment I walked through the door and she saw us as a black woman, and she saw herself in my position, but she wasn't in my position. And I'll never forget a day where I was called into the office by our manager at the time, and the manager said to me that this particular girl had made a complaint against me, that the girl had said that when I'd asked her to do something, I'd raised my voice. So I said to the manager, I said, who was there when this happened? Because I never raised my voice at all. I'd asked her to do something, she didn't do it, and I asked her to do it again, and stressed the importance of the request that I was making. Given that she is a junior member of the team and this is part of her job role, I didn't think it would be a problem me asking her to do it. And my manager at the time, she said, well, she said that she feels like you embarrassed her and da-da-da. And I said to my manager, well, she needs to put it in writing and make it formal, because the fact that you're pulling me up and having this conversation means that you're giving validity to what she's saying, and it just completely doesn't make sense. So either she takes it to HR or she can have a private conversation with me, but I'm not going to waste my time having a conversation about something that is just not true. And I definitely remember seeing the look on my manager's face, and I felt quite disappointed that there was two black women, me and this girl, before a white woman basically showing our underwear, because that's what it is. That it, and where did it come from? It came from this girl's resentment at the fact that she felt that I'd taken a job. In that situation, things got from bad to worse, and this particular young lady, she had an issue with everybody in the team, and I never took it personally. I completely recognised the fact that the construct of the organisation isn't built on any type of fairness, but rather than see me as somebody she can align herself with, learn from, download information from, for possibly her next role, because growth in that particular organisation was never going to happen for her there. She saw me as an enemy, and I definitely went through a bit of I was quite split in how to deal with it, because part of me, I'm trying to make sure that my role is protected and I'm not kind of feeding into this negativity, but equally as well, I didn't want to be in a situation like I was, where I'm up against another black woman in a white dominated workspace. It was such a difficult situation. Anyway, long story short, this went on for several months, and I was accused of bullying this particular girl. And I know where it came from, and it came from the fact that I really invested in having really good relationships with the team and the wider team as well. I was really well respected, and I'd worked on some really, really big contracts. So I did have a bit of a name for myself in the organisation in terms of these contracts and kind of, contract managing them and doing what needed to be done and delivering. And there was a lot of jealousy on her side. Anytime maybe I was called out for a particular contract or you'd see her rolling her eyes, or she's huffing and puffing or whatever. But it wasn't necessarily just personal towards me. It was everyone in the team. But I took it more personally because I was the only black woman on the team. And rather than us working as a team together, she wanted to see me as her enemy. Long story short, she was actually made redundant. And I remember, I remember how it happened, and they treated this girl so badly. They didn't follow any type of logical procedure, but they wanted her out anyway. And my manager had actually told me that they wanted her out, like she was causing too many issues. And I wanted to warn her, but I felt like it wasn't my place to warn her, because she'd already made me the enemy. Why would I then go and take this information to her, knowing full well that she would sell me down the river? I definitely felt like I had a slight moral dilemma. I prayed about it, and I thought, do you know what, Toya? Your preoccupation now has to be making sure you safeguard your job. You cannot safeguard another person's job who has done everything to draw negative attention to herself. She's going to have to ride this wave and learn it the hard way. And she definitely did. And I remember when they broke the news to her that they were going to make her redundant, I remember looking at her and I just thought, do you know what? I'm actually going to ask her if she's okay. And if she tells me to piss off, fine. But that is the right thing to do. And I'd sent her an email and I'd asked her, it was, we had like instantaneous emails. I can't remember, they're not emails, it's like a Skype. So I sent her a pop-up email, a message, and I asked if she was all right. And she said, thank you so much for asking, I'm fine. Have you got 5 minutes? And I just thought, Jesus, have I set myself up here? And I went outside with her and we sat down, and she was like, do you know what, Toya, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry for the way I treated you. I'm really sorry for speaking to our manager behind your back, even though you've done everything in your power to help me, to train me, to do all this stuff, and I didn't treat you in the best way. And at that point, I forgave her. I'd already forgiven her anyway, because I knew that it wasn't personal to me. What was more embarrassing is that it played out in front of a white manager who doesn't understand a lot of the trials and tribulations that black women have to go through in the workplace. And I didn't want her example of the interaction of black women in the office to be me and this girl. That was what I was more disappointed at. And I did tell this girl this. And long story short, me and this girl ended up being like really good, well, I'll say really good friends, but we ended up, you know, she ended up leaving. I helped her as much as possible find a job. I'd, prep her for roles. I would really encourage her, and I really wanted her to learn from the situations that had occurred in our previous workplace. And I definitely found, for me, in a growth perspective, that when you get to a point in your life where you know who you are, and from a career perspective, you're confident in your skills, it's really easy to be able to see when somebody isn't on that journey yet. And rather than me attack her, I just felt like, sometimes you have to almost take a step back. Not every black woman in the office is going to be your alliance or going to be your friend, because every black woman have their own story. And that's what I learned from that situation. Just because you're ready to form allegiances and alliances with black women, and just because you want to, see them as friends in the workplace, and you want to be friends in the workplace, doesn't mean that every black woman's going to want to be your friend or going to want to align with you. It's not always going to be like that. What you have in common is your experiences and the fact that you're both black women. But for some people, they don't want to recognize the struggles of being a black woman. And sometimes, I've heard it before where other black women are like, no, do you know what? I don't want to align myself with other black women because I want to stand on my own because of XYZ. And that is just crazy to me, because who understands a lot of the struggles and trials and tribulations in the workplace than other black women? And I'm not saying be best friends and be bosom buddies, but I definitely feel like there is a power and there's a strength in aligning yourself with other black women and having conversation and having really honest conversation, because I definitely feel most of the honest conversations I've ever had has been with fellow black women, where you don't even have to go into too much detail about certain things. You just get it and you understand it because you're from the same school of experience. And I definitely think that it's really, really sad as black women that we see each other as this competition, but unhealthy competition, where we feel like we have to tear each other down and there can only be one of us at a time. Don't we see that we're making it easy for a lot of these places to make it easy for them to not have more than one black woman in a senior role or in a role? Don't you see that we play into their hands when we tear each other down? And everybody's on their own journey. I definitely have seen, especially like with this podcast, deciding to do a podcast like this wasn't something that I took quite lightly. It's not beans. Yeah, it's something that I really had to think about, because it's for me, it's opening another avenue for people to have access. And I am quite a private person. And over the years, I've really learned to find the balance between being open enough to share and learn from other people's experiences and share my personal experiences, and still maintaining a level of privacy that I feel comfortable with. So in deciding to do this podcast, it's something that I definitely felt that I needed to do, and something that I'm really enjoying doing. But what has become even more apparent is a lot of people are happy for your happiness as long as you're not happier than them. And I've definitely found a bit of negativity that I've encountered has come from fellow black women. And it does sadden me, because if we are comfortable in who we are, and we're comfortable in our own skin, and we're comfortable in understanding that everybody's in their own journey, we never have to see each other as competition. And even if it's okay to be competitive, but not to a point where you have to tear each other down to get there. There has been a lot of people who I thought would support me, and I haven't seen that support, because for many different reasons. But I've recognized within myself that the best support that you could give is the support you give yourself. You have to learn to be comfortable sometimes standing on your own. You have to be comfortable with it, and you have to understand that not everybody is going to be at the same pace as you, and not every person's journey, not every journey you're on can you take everybody with you. There's some people that you can't take on the journey with you. Do you know how much easier work would be if you could create sisterhoods with people who look like you, with people who have been through the same journey as you, with people who understand the struggle? I would say that there are places I've worked in the past, and one of the reasons I've stayed longer than I should have has been some of the colleagues and friendships I've developed in the workplace. And a lot of them have been with black women. You know, they say that one of the reasons you go to work obviously is to get paid, but sometimes some of the reasons why you stay in roles longer than you anticipated is because of the friendships that you form at work. And the test of a true friendship is when one of you leaves. That's when you know whether you've got a friendship or not. With one of you leaves or both of you leave, and you can still sustain a friendship outside of how you met at work, you know? I would always say, when you meet other black women at work, take the time to observe before you make the assumption. Observation is so important on so many different levels when you start a new role. But observe. Like I said earlier, not every black woman is ready to, you know, align themselves with you. Or I've been through things at workplace where the people that have burnt me the most have been my fellow black women. And I had to carry the L because I don't think I did my observations properly, and I didn't take the time to really, you know, get to know fellow black women in the office. I just assumed that because of the colour of our skin and the struggles that we identified that we'd all experienced, that was enough to bring us close together and have this sisterhood. And the reality is, some people don't want a sisterhood. Some people come in just to earn the money and get out. That is fine. But I would say that there is so much power and there's so much strength from aligning ourselves with colleagues in general, but seeing black women and understanding what we've been through in work and aligning ourselves and sharing. How do you expect to learn if you don't share? And this is another thing that me and my friend were talking about, that, you know, a lot of black women in senior roles, some of them have been through so much, they're so traumatized that they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to share. And the way we have been raised isn't really necessarily to share, because we've been raised to a degree to be competitive. And it's an unhealthy competition where we feel like if we share our experiences, then we're going to let somebody else in. But don't you understand that when you pave the way for yourself through your struggle, you're paving the way for the younger generation to have an easier way to get where you are? Don't you realise there's a responsibility you have as a black woman when you pave these ways, when you kind of break boundaries? You're actually making it easier, and you're giving hope to the younger generation coming after you. And I definitely take that responsibility really, really seriously, because I never want another black woman to go, who's, you know, younger than me or whatever, to go through some of the things I went through, when I can share and make it easier for people to progress higher than me. You know, my wish would always be that in what I teach and what I share, that people don't have to go through the same way I did, and people can definitely be better. I want people to be better than me. I want to be able to pave a way so that the younger generation, or black women alike, can definitely see themselves in different roles. And I'm not sitting here saying it's easy, or that, you know, as a black woman we can rid the world of no, but what we can do is spread awareness about our experiences and how we navigated those experiences to make it easier for people who are going through similar situations. When I think about personal growth and development, self-awareness is something that I had to learn pretty early on in my career, to be self-aware of the way I carry myself, and to be aware of the way I'm perceived. And understanding how to navigate the world of work has put a massive responsibility on my shoulders when I've had to go into a workplace and I'm the only black woman in that team. That's a massive responsibility, because they are placing also their stereotypes, and you're having to basically break down all those stereotypes. And I definitely, you know, as I was growing and really getting quite senior into certain roles, the higher you go, the different the politics. And I believe that the racism becomes a lot more over the more senior you get. Over in the sense that you're breaking boundaries into that white, middle class, old boys club in some organisations. And they feel more comfortable because they're senior to say certain things that, you know, at junior or mid-level, people wouldn't dare to say. And I believe it's this white privilege that certain people have where they think they have the right to. I think that if we really delve into white privilege and what white privilege is and how it affects the world of work, you only have to look at what's happened with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry to understand that the intrinsic fabric of the society in which we live in is cultivated through racism. Piers Morgan's obsession with Meghan Markle is beyond me. But I remember somebody messaged me and they said, Toy, did you see the interview with Piers Morgan? And I was like, no, I didn't. I don't want to have that in my energy. I don't want to have to, I can't listen to Piers Morgan. I'm going to be honest. I can't listen to him because he doesn't even accept the possibility, just the possibility that a lot of what Meghan Markle has gone through has been motivated by racism. And he's one of those people that will tell you that racism don't exist, or if it exists, it only exists when he says it exists. And I can't handle that. We're living in a society now where the newspapers they're fearless. They're fearless, and they're not even covert about it anymore. But off the back of what happened with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, there was a tweet that I saw, and it says, "I grew up in a deprived neighborhood, mostly black. I myself am white. The truth is there is no such thing as white privilege, it's class privilege. If you have a lot of money, you can do what you like and it opens doors. Simple. It's poor, rich divide." And a young lady responded, "I agree that class privilege is most definitely a main issue, but within that class system, your whiteness still gives you a privilege a person of colour does not get." I don't understand how a white person can basically tell you that white privilege isn't a thing or it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist to people who have had the benefit of white privilege because you can't see it, because you're enjoying it. Do you understand? But that privilege is not seen with black people. You only have to walk into organisations. The only time you can see any type of privilege from black people, let me think. I don't think there is. I've never seen in the workplace where there is such, I don't believe in black, there's no such thing as black privilege as far as I'm concerned. I don't see it, because before people see you and what you do, they see what you look like, they see your colour. I definitely believe that. Otherwise, why would you have organisations that don't have, your senior management are supposed to reflect their employees. I think they should. Therefore, if you have a multicultural organisation, why don't you have a senior management team that has different cultures, different races representing, your organisation? I don't understand that. It reminds me of an organisation I worked with, and they will tell you that they're culturally diverse, and for all intents and purposes they were. But when it came to diversity in their workforce and diversity in their workforce on a senior level, that was null and void. There was a head of department that joined, and he joined at a time which was really interesting in that particular department that I was in, because it was really culturally diverse. On the senior management team, there was one white woman and 3 white men. And when my manager left, it was almost assumed by a lot of the junior staff that I would take over, that I would be considered, because I basically led the team. So it was almost assumed that I would be, the person that would step up and take over her role. When I had resigned, coincidentally, I just decided I wanted to resign because I wanted to go into contracting. There were some other reasons as well, like it was just disjointed. The pay structure didn't make sense. I remember having a conversation with this said manager, and I thought that he would offer me her role. And what he offered me was a senior contract manager role. but not a head of department role. I ended up leaving that organisation. I did come back as a contractor, and I did say before that I would discuss that in a separate episode. But what was more surprising is this man decided to go outside the organisation to recruit a head of department that has never, ever, ever, ever headed up a department in his life. The person he hired had no real tangible contract management experience. They had just worked in the same field as the organisation and what the organisation did, but had never had hands-on contract management experience in that particular field. And it happened to be a white man, a fellow white man of his, who lived in Surbiton in the same area. And then you had every person that sat on that senior management team was white, middle class. My credentials, my experience in comparison to the person he hired, out of the water. My experience out of the water. But I still was not good enough to be even considered as head of department. Because this other guy, his white privilege allows him to be considered for it, even though he doesn't even have the experience. But I'm only good enough for senior contract manager, but not head of department. And then you want to tell me that white privilege doesn't exist? Okay, if it's not white privilege, it's some type of privilege, but it's based on race. Because if I was a white woman, I'd have more of a chance of consideration than being a black woman. And it goes without saying, because the woman that was head of, the person that was head of department was a white woman. And I definitely find that it's been a real struggle growing up the career ladder. It's been a lot more difficult being a black woman than it has been for my fellow white colleagues, 100%. And I definitely feel that there is a lot more pressure and responsibility to make sure that you're leveling up and adding to your skill set. Your skill set is still fresh. I'm always looking at how do I build on my current experience and my skill set, so that at least if my CV is before you and there's other CVs, mine stands out. And it's difficult, and I'm not sitting here saying, but what is the solution? And the solution has to be that you don't give up. The solution has to be that you continue to add to your skill set, and you continue to make sure that your CV is different from the rest. Like, what is your unique selling point? What is it? I found that my unique selling point wasn't just my legal background and experience, it's the fact that I also had the procurement experience end to end. And I remember when I had an interview, and the lady said to me, listen, it's quite rare to see somebody who has all these legal qualifications and has the procurement qualification too and can do it end to end. It's really, really unique. And the more unique and the more you discover what your unique selling point is, the more that you can charge a premium or expect a premium from any role that you go to. That's something that I've learned. And I'm still thinking about, okay, how can I level up? I never kind of sit on my laurels, because I always recognize that being a black woman in the world of work and growing and getting to a senior director level is difficult. And I need to get to a point, and I definitely think I'm there now, whereby I can't be overlooked, because even if you do not like me, you have to respect the credentials that I come with. And it's a shame that it has to be like that. But I definitely feel like I don't have to fight for the respect so much. What I'm fighting for is to be heard. I remember a meeting I had quite recently in a contract role, and the client, so basically the organisation that I was contracting with, they were meeting with a really big client, and part of my role was to streamline their contracts. So they had contracts everywhere, and we wanted to consolidate all their contracts into one contract. And it's quite a big project, but it's something that I've done in the past quite well, and something that I knew I could deliver. And as we're in this meeting, the client is from a big organisation, but everyone in this meeting is white. I'm the only black woman in that meeting. And I raised a question to the client about the legal construct of the contract. And every time he answered the question, he would never look at me in my face. He would it's almost like he would answer the question but to everybody else and give them eye contact, and he never did it with me. And the reality is, I was the only person in that room that understood how to streamline a contract and how to streamline one of that complexity. But he didn't want to recognize that I was in the room. But the white woman he recognized and had, was quite happy to answer questions and go back and forth. The white man he was ready to do it with. But the black woman, who is me, you don't want to recognize me, because it still sends chills down their spine that I would be in that position. Why am I going to answer to you for? Who are you? And the organization I was contracting with, one of the people in the team was like, Toya has a point, and it's almost like subconsciously, I don't know if she had done it consciously or not, but I think it was subconscious. She directed it at me, and it was almost like in that meeting he had no choice but to then give me eye contact. And in my younger years, I would have been so disheartened, so upset about it, but I'm used to it. And I've had to get to a point where I'm such a subject matter expert that it's my experience that demands the respect. And then as a person, I demand the respect second. And unfortunately, for a lot of organizations, that's how it is. Until you kind of prove yourself and they realize, actually, this person is so important to the team. Do you understand? And it's difficult because it's like going all the way around when really you're there, and it's like, see me. And, I've definitely gone through elements of imposter syndrome and feeling, am I in the right role? I didn't think that I would be able to get here. But then I think when you grow in confidence in self and you recognize that a lot of the battles that you have to encounter in the workplace is due to the intrinsic racism of the way workplaces are constructed, and it's not personally about you have to focus and be responsible for your own growth, for your own respect, and setting boundaries that are respected. My first live Toya Talks event that happened in October 2018, and I spoke about how before you even get into the workplace, you have to get on public transport. You have to get on the train and go to work. And growing up, I loved seeing other black girls going to work because I felt like I was doing the right thing. I'm going to work, we're all doing it. Like, it's not something new, Toya. Responsibility is something that everybody's taking on. And I often used to sit on a train and look at other black women. And I'd sit there and think, I'm going through so much shit at work. Are you going through the same thing? But as I was still growing and developing in self, those were just conversations I was having in my head. And black women in general, more so now, but back then, black women don't really share. And something that I shared in my live event, my Toya Talks live event, is some of the racism, not some, the racism I encounter at work. Before I even get there, it starts on the train. Do you know how many times I've got on the train and white women have looked at me like I'm the scum of the earth? Before they look at me, they'll look at my handbag, they'll look at my jacket, they'll look at my shoe. Then I get this sarcastic smile, this sinister Freddy versus Jason sadistic type of smile, when I know that what they're thinking in their head is, who are you? Where do you think? And a lot of the aggression in my journeys to work has actually come from white men. I'm gonna put that out there right now. I'm gonna put it out there. And one thing is with me, especially growing up, I used to think it, but I used to talk myself out of believing that that was true. I used to think, oh, it's just in my head. And then I got to a point where I was like, do you know what? If something that happens on the way to work, on the train, I'm going to confront it. I'm not going to be aggressive, but I'm going to confront it. And I'll never forget, there was this one time I was on the train and there was this guy and he was with his girlfriend. I'm assuming it's his girlfriend or his mistress. I don't know who she was, whatever. And the train was really, really packed. It was rammed. And he had a backpack on and he kept shoving me with this backpack. And in my head, when you've got a backpack on, you must be conscious that you're going to shove people, or at least you're occupying two spaces with that your one pregnant back. And I said to him, excuse me, can you be a bit more careful? Who do you think you're talking to? It's a packed train. This is what happens at rush hour. And I was like, yes, I'm aware. I was born and raised in this country, so I definitely understand how rush hour works, since I am going to work, just like you. And the woman that he was with, she was like, excuse me, you don't have to be rude. I says, you don't want it with me. I'm telling you now, you don't want it with me, honey. And then he stepped in front of me and the girl, because he was standing to my side. And when she was speaking, it's like she moved her thing so she could be facing me. And he got really aggressive with me. And I said to him, what is it that you're actually going to do on this train with your silly woman and your one pregnant back? I put it to you, yeah, that if I was a white woman, he wouldn't have been like that. I put it to you. And the reason I say that is because the white woman, he also knocked with that backpack. When he knocked her, she made a sound and he goes, oh, I'm so sorry. So what is the difference between her making a sound and me saying, excuse me, can you be a bit more careful? And I was, there was no tone in my voice. It was really just, could you be a bit more careful? Because I know he's not doing it deliberately. And I tend to find that before you even enter the workplace, you have to deal with the microaggression that is birthed from racism on the train before you even get to work. That's crazy to me. I've now gotten to a point where I have to protect my space, my mental health and my space. And I say to myself, do you know what, Toya? Unless somebody is physically harming you, don't set the tone for your day at work based on your interactions before you get to work. I've had to literally have a conversation with myself and say that. Even till today, I'm talking to you, I will wait to get on a train. I'll get on a train and there is always, and I don't know what it is. I personally think there are some white women that feel threatened by black women because black women generally are quite confident. We're going to work, we dress well. I will see a black woman on a train and I will tell her, you look really nice, or your jacket looks really, I will do that because I want that black woman to feel a level of confidence too. Honey, I recognize, I see you, baby. I see you. But I have never felt comfortable on a train, on a packed train with white men, because my interactions with them on the train has never been good. Not all of them, some of them, but there are also white women, and maybe I'd like to believe that they're not aware of the intensity of the aggression in which, because what white women do also is they put forth this white fragility by weaponizing their tears or weaponizing that voice that sounds like a child to elicit emotion so that other people can feel sorry for them. And I definitely feel as a strong black woman, there is less empathy for the negative things that we have to go through because we some of us stand up for ourselves or some of us are vocal. There's less empathy, but more empathy for white women, even though sometimes I feel that the tears of white women are very dangerous, very, very dangerous, and they weaponize it in the workplace. And this is the reason why I say that at work all the time, you have to be strategic on your approach. You've got to be strategic in how you put forward your assertions, how you assert yourself. You've got to be smart enough to understand that when you're writing emails, you need to stick to the facts, because they desensitize black women and therefore don't accept that we have feelings. So when you start writing emails to tell them how you feel, they can't identify with your feelings because some of their preconceived stereotypes that they have in their mind does not and is not compatible with some of the emotions that we're putting forth. It isn't. So you've got to be smart. For example, before we wrap up, there was an organisation I was working for, a really big technology company. Long story short, I was working on a particular contract and I've just taken over this business unit. And one of the sales people in this business unit happened to be a woman. And all her emails were really littered with, she was just aggressive. And I just took it that maybe that's just the way she talks, She put some time in my diary to have a meeting about a particular contract, despite the fact that I'd already given her the advice over email. So I agreed to this meeting. I thought maybe she needs me to reiterate it face to face. So anyway, I walk into this meeting and in she walks with a junior member of her team. And before I could even sit down, she'd already started telling me all her issues with the legal advice that I'd given her and whatnot. Do you know that in the process of reiterating the legal advice, she interrupted me and she says, "That's fucking ridiculous. Fucking ridiculous. Your advice is fucking ridiculous." I closed my notebook. I said to her, "This is the end of the meeting. There is no way I'm going to accept verbal abuse from you because you do not like the legal advice I've given to you. We're in a professional environment and I do not expect to be treated like that." I closed my notebook. I left the room. As soon as I got to my desk, the junior member of staff that was in that meeting, I sent her a WebEx instantaneous communication. And I basically said to her that I was really, really disappointed at being sworn at and that I was really highly offended and I found it inappropriate. Then she responded and she says, "Toya, I completely agree. She shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I think she's just a little upset and frustrated. I definitely could see how upset you were about it and there was just no reason for her to swear at you." Then I sent an email to my head of department, my head of department's manager, and basically reiterated what had happened in the room. The head of department, as soon as she read that email, to her defense, she went straight upstairs to go and look for the girl to have a conversation with her. Couldn't find her. As the day progressed, there was no type of apology that came through, nothing. So 24 hours later, I decided to send an email to HR. And I had my boss. So my boss was, it was to my boss, CCHR, and I told them what had happened. Then I went to go and find a policy. There was a particular policy of how to treat your colleagues is what the policy is called, and I attached it. And I basically said in that email that I expect an apology within 48 hours. And if the apology doesn't come, I'm going to make it formal, my complaint, because I have been verbally abused. Well, I won't bore you with all the details, but put it this way. By the time we had that meeting, HR was mediating, and HR had read out my complaint about this girl to the girl. And HR had asked me if there's anything I wanted to add, and I just said, "Listen, I just don't appreciate being sworn at." Then HR turned to me and says, "Well, Toy, I don't think she swore at you. I think she swore at the situation." I says, "Whether it was at me, at the situation, it was to me. And that's the point." Without going into further detail about what happened, in that moment, I realised that if you do not have your back in the office, I've already told you, HR are trash. I'm so sorry. God forgive me. It's not all of you guys that are in HR, but HR in general, for all the organisations I've worked for, are trash. Paper pushers is what I call them. Tea and biscuit brigade, that's what I call them. How are you going to tell me the person who swore at me didn't swear at me and swore at this situation, but swore to me? That don't make no sense. I had all the evidence there. And then when I came into that meeting, I had a copy of that instantaneous communication that I had with that junior member of staff after the incident, and I presented it there. I said, "From the look of this is the only witness that was there. As you can see, the person who was the witness even corroborated what I said and said that this girl swore at me." Do you know, before I could move on, the girl said, "You know what, Toya? I apologise. I shouldn't have sworn at you." But if I didn't pull out that paper, HR are ready to protect a fellow white person who actually perpetrated the swearing at me in a professional environment. I could have lost it. I could have just said, "You know what, I've had enough." And I thought, no, Toya. You have to set the boundary. This is part of the boundary setting, so that this girl can go and tell her other colleague, you see that Toya, don't swear. And I made it clear to them, this is an informal meeting. If I don't get an apology and a written apology, you better know that I'm going to take this further and I'll go through a formal grievance process. I don't come to work to get sworn at. If you're not happy with what I said, walk out of the room. At best, if you're not happy with what I said, tell me you're going to speak to a manager. But what you're not going to do is, during the execution of my job, decide that it's okay to swear at me. If I was a white woman delivering the same legal advice, would you swear at me? The answer is no. And I know there's undertones of racism in the way that girl interacted with me. And it's a shame that even with a witness, somebody is still defending that behaviour. But you have to have your own back in the office. You have to be loyal to yourself as well. And you have to be able to cover your back. I think the sad part of, the story that I've just told you is that I understand completely the importance of having alliances with fellow black women. And in that particular organisation, we had a really nice alliance when I say alliance, you know what I mean, like a sisterhood. And I remember coming back and telling them what had happened. And I felt so much love and support from my colleagues, especially the black women who I'd formed really, really nice relationships with. And they confirmed to me that, you know what, Toya, the reality is we're always often seen as a target and as an easy target, because as black women, they know that when we go to HR, if we make a complaint, we're almost seen as the problem rather than the person that the negative and destructive behaviour is being targeted towards. And if you were to ever suggest that there's undertones of racism, these people would be the first people to tell you that you're crazy or mad. Oh, in fact, it's all in your head, you're making it up. And it's this type of covert racism that is harder to pinpoint. It's so much harder to pinpoint because it's not obvious, right? If it's covert, it's obvious. You can give an example. But as black women, like, I'm not saying every situation where you're treated differently is because of your race. But when you're working in a white-dominated organisation where you're maybe either one of maybe 3-4 black women and you're all being treated similarly, whereas your fellow white women are not being treated that way. I mean, it does throw up the question, could my race be a motivation for this negative behaviour? I really hope, if there is anything that you've taken away from this episode, it is the importance of building sisterhoods and understanding where sometimes when we don't, where it has come from, and working on ourselves to better form alliances with black women and being open enough to share with black women, because a lot of the experiences we go through are the same. I hope also what I've been able to put across in here is, some of the experiences I've had in the workplace because of the colour of my skin. And I'm not saying it would have been made easier if I had other black women to discuss it with, but can you see the power of having conversations in the workplace and sharing and sometimes unburdening yourself about things that you feel are happening in the workplace because of the colour of your skin? Is so exhausting to not share, because if in not sharing, sometimes we think we're the only ones, when in fact, when you share, you learn and you grow. And in most cases, I'd like to believe you get support from other black women who completely understand what you're going through. This is the end of this episode, and I would like to say thank you so much for each and every one of you who has taken the time to listen to this podcast. I'd also like to say thank you so much for all the messages I've received through the Toya Talks Instagram page. I want to end this episode by giving you an email address in which to write to. I get a lot of messages on my Snapchat, and what I want to do is give you guys an email address to write to me about things that you're going through in the workplace, things that you need advice on. And once a month, I will be anonymously sharing some of your questions or your experiences and giving advice. So the email address to write to is Toya, Toya, .talks, inc @gmail.com. So it should read toya.talksinc @gmail.com. My name has been Toya Washington. Please keep the conversation going. My hashtag is, of course, Toya Talks. Follow me on Twitter and both Instagram pages. I will look forward to another podcast, Toya Talks. See you in the next episode.